Hello, I'm Dave March, the spy guy, and for some reason my screen's a little, camera's looking weird, and not too sure why the angle. Oh, maybe that might help. Better angle. I don't know. Anyways, my channel here is about starting to talk about the news and what's going on in the world from an alternative perspective, based on my years of writing in history and following politics. So, if you like that kind of stuff, be sure to stay around and watch. We just did a video last Monday where I talked about the escalating situation in Serbia. So I wanted to do a brief update on that, and why don't I press do my share my screen here, and we can talk about that. So there's a few other things I was going to talk about today. I wanted to talk about the EU oil price gap, and I wanted to talk about General Zaluzhny's media blitz. And General Zaluzhny is the head of the Ukrainian army, and an interesting guy. What with his death head dagger and a few other things along that there. Oh, hey, Matthew, do you have? Yeah, let me just check something here. I've been meaning to do this, and I was just on YouTube looking at it, trying to figure it out. I wanted to add you as a mod, and as you mod everyone else, I figured I should have you mod me. As occasionally I get people putting weird stuff on my account without meaning to. So I'm going to go to the YouTube studio. Go to, what is it? Dashboard, I believe. Content. Just had this up 2 minutes ago. Settings. That's what I wanted. Settings. Permission. Community. And add moderator. Matthew Coburn. No. Let me see. I have a bunch of Matthew Coburns here. I just don't know which one it is, which one you are. Do you have like a YouTube thing where, or is it on here? Is it something? No, I have my ability to do stuff, but I'm going to have to ask like someone I know who knows how to do that to do it one of these days. Anyways, we were I was talking about Serbia. Here we go. No, that's the wrong one. Serbia. Here we go. Yes, it's matching up. So Serbia to request permission to deploy its troops in Kosovo. The Serbian government will ask the NATO peacekeeper commander to allow the country to send up to 1,000 police and army personnel to Kosovo. So this is an update from Thursday. So I know it definitely wasn't around for Monday when I was talking about it. It's the first time Belgrade has requested to deploy troops in Kosovo since the United Nations Security Council resolution ended the 98-99 war, during which NATO bombed rump Yugoslavia, compromised in Serbia and Montenegro to protect Albanian majority Kosovo. The government will ask for the return of hundreds and no more than 1,000 army and police troops, said the Serbian President Vučić. I do not expect to get a positive answer. The request comes during a spate of clashes between Kosovo authorities and Serbs in the northern region where they constitute a majority. If you want to watch the last video where I talked about that, I can give you, I did a bit more of the history of that conflict. UN resolution states that Serbia may be allowed, if approved by K4, which is, I can't remember what the term means, but K4 is like the peacekeeping group responsible for the former Yugoslavia. To station this personnel at border crossings, Orthodox Christian religious sites, and areas with their majorities. In 2008, Kosovo declared independence from Serbia with Western backing. It's independent and that is recognized by 110 countries. And once again, we have that line, but not by Serbia, Russia, and 5 European Union member states. No, the answer should be not recognized by 95 countries, including Serbia, Russia, and 5 European Union member states. Places like Spain, this thing, it's like a lot of these guys are just copying and pasting each other's work and just building on it. Lazy writing, but they're the ones getting paid. We are all witnessing Serbs' constant threat to Kosovo, said the Kosovo president Osmani. Serbia and its leader Vucic know very well that the presence of the Serbian army in the territory of Kosovo ended once and for all on June 12, 1999. Or did it? Serbia aims to join the EU, but to complete its membership process must resolve issues with Kosovo. Kosovo filed an application for EU membership on Thursday. Both parties agreed to EU-sponsored dialogue in 2013, but little progress has been made. What's going to happen? What will happen? We are looking at possibly the breakup of the EU in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm betting more on 5, due to all the things crashing around it. But here we have, like, everyone's still going through the motion because that's what you do until you hit your brick wall and you stop. What was I going to talk about? I wanted to talk a little bit about, I was reading that book again I mentioned last time, Mad Catastrophe. And it's really the breakup of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And some of the things in it are so resembling to some of the stuff we're seeing today, not just in Europe, but in other parts of the world, including the United States, where the rest of the world was going through what is called the Gilded Age, the really beginning of industrialization. Austria-Hungarian was seemingly slipping further and further behind in the race. They were considered the poor man in Europe, with only the sick man in Europe being Turkey, which was considered off worse. Just going to talk a little bit about the Habsburg army. After 1866 adopted a territorial structure like Prussia's, the monarchy was carved into 15 core districts, from Innsbruck's east to Lemberg and Lviv here, and from Prague south to Ragusa, Dubrovnik, with every regiment drawing its 4 battalions locally and joining them to their nearest corps. A perfectly logical system that never had been attempted in Austria because the multinational people were not judged reliable in the age of nationalism. Had they been left in their home districts, they might have fraternized with unhappy locals and turned their guns on the emperor. So until the defeat of 1866, Austrian regiments had bounced around the monarchy every 3 years. Czechs to Budapest, Hungarians to Prague, Croats to Venice, and so on. This extraterritoriality in peacetime, maintained as a counter-revolutionary measure, had so complicated Austrian mobilizations in wartime that was largely abolished in the 1880s. But the new territorial system was not without its own problems. Please replace my staff company with one made up of more intelligent human material, one Austrian general wrote another in February 1914, only to be told, denied, do what you can with your men of lower intelligence. The general had wanted Germans, and for his staff and company was ordered to make do with the Serbs instead. Just to give you a kind of an attitude, and that's certainly an attitude we're probably seeing in a lot of places in Europe right now. Okay. One of the biggest problems are, they pointed out there, it was leading up to the mass war of World War I. Another page I'm reading. And so the fabled Austrian-Hungarian bureaucracy supplanted representative institutions to govern the monarchy, to absorb the growing numbers of college graduates. Revenue-depleting jobs abounded in the state service. Well, it sounds like both America and the European Union. Debarking in his hometown of Klagenfurt, Robert Musil took in the provincial headquarters, schools and universities, barracks, courthouses, prisons, bishops' palace, assembly rooms, and theater, together with the people who needed to run them. It was a vast apparatus of imperial administration, consisting mainly of German burgher stock transplanted centuries ago to Slavic soil. And the transplants loomed from one end of the monarchy to the other. The cost of this patronage, 2 billion crowns per year on bureaucrats, about 5 times what the emperor spent on the military, utterly overwhelmed the state budget. The Habsburg civil service alone consuming more than a quarter of total state revenues in 1913. Addressing the Austrian-Hungarian delegations in December of 1911, the Emperor Joseph's war minister revealed that Hungary alone, which was forever protesting the size of the Habsburg army, employed 320,000 civil servants, more bureaucrats, in other words, than there were soldiers in the entire Austrian-Hungarian army. The coming mass war would require effective mass administration, and Hungary was ill-equipped for challenge. The General von Hotzendorf who would direct the war effort in 1914, raged before the war against Austro-Hungarians' self-defeating culture of memos, permission slips, stamps, petitions, minutes, and reports. Position, title, rank, and form are always cherished above efficiency, leading to the empire's legendary bumbling, which was bad enough in peace and would be ruinous in the coming war. The Habsburg army was supposed to operate more efficiently and bridge the empire's increasingly virulent national differences. It didn't. A polyglot like Conrad, who became chief of the general staff in 1906 and spoke 7 of Austria-Hungary's 15 languages, was the exception and not the rule in an army that historically had prided itself on a supranational tolerance in the land. In Hungary, languages other than Magyar were simply banned. Yeah, here's something that people don't understand really about the history of Hungary and why Hungary is so weird in the European Union. The Hungarian nationalism and the Hungarian nationalists, going back to the 1848 revolution, and of course before then, are very much about keeping Hungarian language alive and the population alive. And that means suppressing all minorities. They won't allow anyone else to teach any languages. They want to preserve their culture at all costs, which is why Orban keeps winning giant election swings. And the opposition is, because they are running against the history and their culture, continue to lose. So it's not just about corruption. It's just about simple historic facts. Where was I? In Austria, foreign military attachés noticed that the multilingual ideal was rarely attained in practice. Theoretically, men in a Slovenian regiment, for example, would speak Slovenian among themselves, but be commanded in German. Troops therefore learned a few dozen phrases in German, but officers in such a regiment were expected to be fluent in Slovenian in order to explain complicated matters and build a spirit de corps with their men. In reality, larger German officer corps would learn hard on cheat sheets like military Slovenian handbook, which contained useful phrases including "shut your mouth," "don't speak unless spoken to," "wait for me in the office," "no smoking in the stables," and you still not understand. Regimental officers had to know the language of the men, or at least the fragments of it, but staff officers didn't. This led to comical scenes at maneuvers, so not so comical in war, when staff officers would gallop up to lines and ball questions in German. "Where is the enemy, and what is the strength?" And the troops would stare back incomprehendingly. Language is just another of the many problems facing the Habsburg military. The Hungarians, determined to curb the power of Vienna, had kept their army so small since 1867 that it was ludicrous. It was over-officered. Sounded like the United States and most of the rest of NATO armies. Look, how many... Canada has, 80,000 men? We have 5 vice admirals, or sorry, 5 admirals, 5 officers at 3-star rank. We haven't commanded a navy that big since the end of the Second World War. Well, I guess we did for a little while going up into Korea and that. But by the 60s, all those ships were gone. Language was just another of many problems facing the Habsburg military. It had the highest ratio of officers to troops of any great powers, and these officers were changing. This is something Russia, I noted at the start of the war. Russia spent in the last 8 years getting rid of this kind of lopsided military. Their army is now much more lower officers to ratio. They still have problems with their NCO corps, but this is certainly something that we're seeing. Yes, so, hey, hello from Serbia too. Hey, I'm definitely not going to get your name right. Yep, I think that the Duran guy said Serbia didn't do anything. You know what happened last time. That is certainly correct. So, where was it? In the first place, there were grain, which meant old commanders and a huge apparatus of well-paid retirees who drained funds from the active duty army. Pensionopolis was Habsburg army slang for this bloated corps of retirees. In 1910, for example, there were 33 active 3-star generals and 3 times as many living in retirement. Among 2 stars, the situation was just as bad. 91 active, 311 retired. Among 1 star, the retired to active ratio was 4-to-1. The rump of actually active officers was no less alarming. The army until 1866 had been officered to the highest levels by aristocrats and the junior levels by gentry and upwardly mobile sons of rich peasants, what Offenburg called conservative, calm, and safe social elements. They were the sort of men who could bond platoons of peasant infantry and persuade them to endure hard marches and take casualties. The new officers of the 20th century, however, were changing along with the rest of society. The aristocrats, or Offenburg discovered, had almost entirely abandoned their military career, and the gentry and the rich peasants' sons were also declining, down to 40% of less or less. Now, most officers descended from railroad personnel, innkeepers, clerks, petty officials, teachers, and shopkeepers. They lacked the toughness, spirit, and panache, schwung, of the old breed, who had commanded a large peasant army as if they had been born to it, which of course they had. Now the army mingled rural and urban troops and put them under plebeian officers who were susceptible to the very national politics that were tearing the monarchy apart and would probably not hold up well under fire. It didn't help that 80% of these officers and the great majority of the NCOs were Germans, and generally decidedly mediocre men who had judged the army's notoriously low pay and slow promotion acceptable. One son of a famous Austrian general was a 60-year-old major in 1914. And that's something you're seeing. So as the relative wealth of the country went up, only people who could go in the army were those who could afford to. And this is something we're also seeing in the West, and with the corresponding decline in the quality and capability of the troops and their leadership class, not to mention the fact that all the woke stuff is making the conservative parents and other people look, I'm not going to go to join the army to be lectured to for days on end. I'm going to go and get a real job and make some money. And that's something we're certainly seeing in America and, of course, in Europe, where, as we discussed in one of my previous episodes, the mighty German Bundeswehr is down to less than 70,000 men. Offenburg also ruled the absence of educated officers of the well-situated middle class. Those candidates were all flocking to finance and the professions in pursuit of riches and status. The army had lost and never recovered its social prestige after the twin blows of 1859 and 1866, and the fighting was losing battle with the easy money and material spirit of the modern age. Sound familiar? In the peacetime army, it took an average 16 years to rise from lieutenant to captain, the rank at which the average officer would probably retire, single and unloved. No ambitious woman would marry such a man, and on a meager pension, with most of his savings squandered on horses, uniforms, gambling, prostitutes, balls, and the debts contracted to pay for them. A man lucky enough to make major after a plodding 25-year career would be earning just 3,600 crowns or $500 a year, less than a school teacher, a trolley conductor, even a plumber. And those were the lucky ones who had to cope only with a slow promotion, and bad salaries had been frozen at 1860 levels to discourage an army career. The unlucky were forced out early with an injury, an illness, or some disciplinary infraction, and forced to live out their lives in grinding poverty. The raw results of the social changes in the Austrian-Hungarian officer corps was a deep and dangerous complacency that one finds in great measure only among officers of the Turkish army. There's also a joylessness about the Austrian mess. Walk into one, and you won't even find wine on the table. Everyone present fretted about the cost of it. The old happy warrior spirit of previous generations that had drunken, doffing Austrian officers and even had become a relic of the past. There was a tendency toward corruption in the penny-pinching Habsburg army, which Offenburg revealed in 1910, and which he was punished for in 1915 after his own insider trading on the shares of defense contractors. I can't imagine that any American general or European general is not doing that. I just can't imagine the revolving door from defense contractors to Raytheon and all that kind of stuff. Strivers will do anything to raise their social standing, improve their finances, and escape their little border posts. Gloominess, rage, doubt, and sick brains drive our officers to criminal acts. Most of the poor education of army officers, most of whom lack even the ability to carry on a decent conversation. Those who were socially gifted waged ferocious turf wars to place themselves closer to Vienna and the circles of wealth and influence. Anyways, that's a bit of a long one. I'll probably get back to the Austrian-Hungarian fall in a future episode, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Anyways, sorry, it's a little hot in here. I happen to be sitting right next to the furnace. Even though I have it off, it just gives up ambient heat from my building. So what was I doing? I was talking about yes, we are going to talk a little about General Zelensky. So I'm just going to have to share, and I got to remember not to keep closing off my presentations. It's a bad habit, I know. Share screen, Microsoft Edge tab. This piece comes from our friends, someone I'm following on Patreon and some other stuff. This is another post from the Sonar 21. And he's talking about General Zelensky's media blitz, a bunch of stuff that, like, a few months ago, the new commander in chief. And I feel very sorry for Zelensky, knowing that his commander in chief of his army is a Putin stooge. I mean, I've been saying this for a year now, and I'm Putin stooge. So why isn't he Putin stooge? Commander in chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said Thursday there will be a new offensive against Ukraine's capital by Russia. I'm not too sure about that, unless you consider all offensives to be going against that will eventually lead to the fall of the country and the capital as part of that. According to our estimates, the Russians have a reserve of 1.2 to 1.5 million people. Well, depending. So the active reserve is probably, I believe the standing army is about 1 million, 2 million active reserve. And as I've said, another 8 to 13 million, depending on how you count them and how old you go and how old that works out and how many people just kind of are injured or dead and all that is the number of people who are trained manpower reserve. That's what happens when you have a country that still practices conscription. None of the other countries do. We all wanted volunteer armies, and now we don't have the ability to compete. I'm not saying necessarily we should bring back conscription, but it does give certain countries certain advantages. And my one friend, I've had videos of friends about conscription, and they're like, the problem with conscription is when you have such a large army, you're tempted to do things with it. And certainly if the United States were to bring back conscription, you would be tempted to do things like Vietnam over again. Can you imagine 500,000 men stuck in Afghanistan? Zelensky rejected claims that there are problems in Russia concerning a lack of will to fight. Russian mobilization worked. It's not true that their problems are so serious that these people will not fight. They will. I studied the history of the two Chechen wars. It was the same. They may not be as well equipped. They are still a problem for us. Well, yeah, I can't speak directly on the equipment side of things. Certainly, as far as I could tell, the popularity of this war is at the same level of the popularity of invading Afghanistan in 2001, 2002 was. And people forget countries are nationally patriotic. Even these people, these Hungarians, Austrian Hungarians was reading about, they still have patriotic fervor when they went to war. It takes years of hardship to take off that edge. This idea that the war would not be popular, that people would be like going around and having to Shanghai troops into battle was just crazy. And it's a lack of serious education in our high schools. We need to teach people about, and I don't think in university, we need to really teach people about these things. I was learned about World War I and the conscription crisis. I wrote freaking essays on the conscription crisis in Canada. So this is something that's been known to me for a while. But this idea that people are just going to be are going to run away in the first year or two, you always have a core group of people who believe in their country and they will come out and fight. And you're going to have this. It's happening in Ukraine. It's happening in Russia. And all these idiots who go around telling you this stuff just are ignorant. And I've had previous complaint. That's one of my biggest complaints about this whole thing. The staggering ignorance of so many people on basic history. Okay? Yes, sanctions can work. We saw it in the First World War. Germany and Austria and eventually collapsed because of the sanctions brought about by the British blockade. It took 4 years and losses on the battlefield to make that happen. You're not going to collapse a country in 6 months based on sanctions. Look at Iran. Seriously. Larry Johnson goes on, count me surprised. The illusion is not parroting the talking points commonly heard from Zelensky and much of the Western media. For instance, he acknowledges Russia has a numerical advantage in the number of trained troops deployed to front lines and rejects the repeated claims that Russians have no will to fight. Zelensky also paid attention to the buildup of Russian forces in Belarus and will not shy in stating he fully expects the Russians to launch a new attack with ground forces on Kiev. And like I said, I'm with Brian Berletic. I think there's a large scale. This is just going to be a steady pushback along a broad front. There's no Schwerpunkt. There's a knife thrust, unless they go to war with Serbia. Unless NATO really, this thing with Russia's little brother heats up, and then you might see some of the general staff that would be in my position arguing for a much more bolder attack to do something like a drive on Odessa to bring oppression and give Hungary an escape hatch. It's not impossible to hide the movement of forces at the division level. If George S. Patton were alive today, he would not be able to replicate the creation of a ghost army that was used to convince the German general staff that Allies were going to attack at Pas-de-Calais. Yeah, you'd have to have a lot of men and people walking around that thing. Zelensky's candor had its limits. He flat out lied the number of Ukrainian reservists available to reinforce units in the field, but in doing so, he accurately highlighted Ukraine's desperate need for armor, artillery, and ammunition. Ukraine cannot produce what it needs, and the United States and NATO supplies are running low, and they cannot produce what is needed. Then the HIMARS rocket, my understanding is that United States can make rockets for the HIMARS at the rate of 250 a year. We're watching the Russians probably, I'm fairly convinced they're probably making 500 cruise missiles a month in Russia. That's what they're doing. Thousands of missiles, and we can't build 250, and we have no capability to ramp up the production. Then he insisted that Ukraine will attack Melitopol. That is delusional, with scant armor, limited fuel supplies, troubled lines of communication, and no air power. Ukraine would enter a new slaughterhouse if it tried to launch such an operation because Russia has fortified its defense around Melitopol. Yeah, well, hey. The Ukrainian source published the following account of the battles underway in Donetsk. Okay, let's get that one. Scroll down a little further. Outside the city, the close proximity of Russian and Ukrainian lines, often less than a kilometer apart, means that Russia doesn't even need to use its heavy artillery as much, instead of relying on an endless stream of mortar, grenade, and rocket launcher fire to pound Ukrainian positions. For the Ukrainian soldiers tasked with holding the first line, there's little to do but hope that one's trench or doesn't take a direct hit. Our first and second lines of defense are relatively stable, but it comes at a great cost. Some units are simply running out of people. From what I saw in only one fight, we had around 10 of our guys killed, never mind the number wounded. Not everyone could be extracted from the battlefield. Some just bled out where they lay. The Ukrainian military leadership tell everyone about the huge cash release suffered on the Russian side, but from what I can see around Bakhmut, things are more or less okay for them, said this person. In terms of the coordination between their brigades and artillery and their overall unit cohesion, you can tell that they're doing very well in this sector because of how difficult it is to fight against them. Look, what can I say? This is just silliness. Like, Ukraine needs to negotiate while there's still time. They're not. They're living a fantasy world, and a lot of more people are going to die because of it. And that's kind of sad to hear that, but that's the world we live in. And I understand, yes, people are thoroughly propagandized. I heard this week the number of people who, the media companies that were bought out by the Ukrainian and other regimes to make this was 150 media relations companies were hired to sell the Ukraine war. But the whole problem is sort of like they've been telling us for months, Ukraine's winning, Russia's on its ropes, and then they come up to us and say, well, we need more stuff. And we don't have any more stuff to give them, but why do you need our stuff? I thought you captured all this Russian stuff. I thought Russia's on the run. I thought all this, and now they're the victim of their boy who cried wolf problem of like, instead of having an honest discussion with people up right away about how desperate this fighting this war was, they lied to everybody for a year. And now no one believes. Well, I don't know if people still believe, but it's like, how can you say you need all this equipment and all this help if you're not winning? You're now down to the dregs. And I saw Alexander Curse of the Duran talking about the 1940 speech Mannerheim had to give in Finland. I know a little bit about that. I've fought that war on several occasions. Finland, like, it's hard to describe the blood in the snow. Like when the Soviets first went in to Finland in '39, they thought they were welcome. The Finns were going to welcome them with open arms. They also believed all their own internal BS. They had a marching band lead the invasion into Finland. The Finns responded with appropriate, and they killed a lot of Russian troops. And everyone talks about that, but they don't talk about how in the summer of 1940, Stalin sends Timoshenko up, reorganizes the lines, uses the battleships and a mass tank force to smash their way through the Mannheim line and basically lay Helsinki low and dictate the terms. And now we're going to see the same thing. Everyone is looking, we are in a modern day equivalent of Finland of 40, where we're there. Except for the Russians did a little bit better this time around than they did back then. But we're going to watch the Finns are just going to have to quit at some point at this rate. But, stranger things have happened. I'm going to see if this works. Oil price crap. Okay. No, apparently I do have to share something every time. Now, I need to get 2 monitors and I need to get a new desk. So that's something I'll have to do in the new year. Basically, I have one giant monitor, but like I've learned you need to do 2 monitors in this business and trying to do reports. So setting things up and doing stuff. So that'll be something I'll look like in the future. Anyways, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to have to close that one. Go back to here. Go back to present. Share screen. And the final thing here is I wanted to talk to you about something I was reading on Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast or website. Sorry about that. Well, hey, you're watching this. Maybe some people could talk for hours and hours like that, but sometimes I need a drink. The EU and the US went forward with their long debated, long telegraphed move to put a price cap on Russian oil at $60 a barrel. By believing they can pressure suppliers into hauling Russian oil unless they run afoul of the sanctions that support the price cap, they believe they can only take only Russian oil off the market for the long run. Oh, God. Okay, so there's some... I was watching the movie Blow with Johnny Depp a couple months ago. And he walks into this, he's talking to it, just made a deal where he brings in all this cocaine to his local dealer and says, hey, and it's the 1970s, early 80s, right? He says, I have all this cocaine. And the guy's like, yeah, that's great. You brought me all this cocaine, but you brought me more cocaine than I sell in a year. How are we going to sell all this cocaine? And then it cuts. Screen 3 days later. Oh my God, it took us 3 whole days. You got to get me more of that stuff. And that's the thing with oil. The oil is like drugs. People need oil. And you're not going to be able to put up a price cap and basically force people to and sell people. We're only going to buy this this amount of money, and that's what you have to take. And it's like Russia's like, I can go to India and I can go to China and they're going to buy it. And the fact is, they're bigger. They're just as big or bigger economies as you, and they don't care about your sanctions because they know if you really truly sanction them, you'll be hurt worse. How the hell does the modern West, the democratic West, whatever the hell we want, the free world as we used to call it, how the hell do they think that they can keep up? Their 1 billion people is going to be greater than 2 billion people. Yes, I know that once upon a time, technology had made a big difference in that, but we're not there anymore. India has finally got rid of its permit raj and is a pretty modern and developed economy. The Chinese are basically a fascist state at this point. They have no problem making money and buying stuff. They're going to be happy when you buy this oil. There is a price tag you can look at and say yes or no to. Crude contracts are written based on a discount or premium to a benchmark price at a particular moment in time. Here, a better one from Tom. Because of the way oil is actually traded in the real world versus the way it trades in Janet Yellen's head, this policy is actually much harder to implement than it actually looks. You don't buy oil at the crude oil counter at Target or Walmart, right? So it's a very complicated system here. You guys can go and find the site. I'll try and remember to put a post on the bottom of this thing. I'm still learning this stuff. Give me a little forbearance. That said, Janet Yellen may be stupid, but she's not that stupid. She knows that the price cap she's championed will do. So as always with these people, the question you should be asking isn't will this work or how will Russia respond, but what is the point of this exercise? And this is the attack. He was attacked by Sputnik News, a Russian news agency. Yeah, turns out something I watched during the lockdown is that if I wanted to learn about what was going on in my actual country, I had to go to foreign countries. So I don't know. I won't say the Russia RT still has its own spin. I've seen some of the documentaries that go laughable documentaries on there, but for the most part, you're going to get views that you won't get back on the mainstream corporatized United States led and media. Basically 6 corporations deciding whatever letting you see what you want to see, with Fox News seeing a slightly different version of what the other 5 are saying. If everyone knows that price floors and price ceilings always and without fail create production shortages, then why did they do this when the world clearly needs more oil? Because this is a feature of the policy, not a bug. By doing this, like every other intervention into oil delivery since the start of the war in Ukraine, the goal was to take Russia's supply offline and hope that other producers would see the opportunity to take market share from the evil Russians while simultaneously driving to push capital investments to competing energy and technologies like nuclear, hydrogen, and unicorn farts. So and hydrogen farts, fusion, I would expect. But that's certainly something that I can say is true. I've been hearing for the last year all this money and effort and all this stuff going back into Calgary and Edmonton and Alberta, and a lot of money is starting to concentrate back in the oil industry. So that's a good thing for Canada, I guess, as long as Alberta doesn't succeed. And I really don't know much about the Alberta secession issue, other than to say everything I keep reading when I do look into it is that Alberta is just becoming Quebec. They're just copying and pasting whatever Quebec did over the last 50 years and applying it to them. So if Quebec can be a distinct and separate nation from Canada while living in Canada, then Alberta can. So it hasn't worked. Russia hasn't. Well, it has driven that capital investment. Russia happily sells their oil at a major discount to Brent crude, but will it remain the $30 China and India have been paying below Brent? Only if Brent stays at $90 per barrel. With Brent now trading in the high 70, those discounts attenuate. And now we have what I asked him to talk about in his report this weekend, which you have to go, if you want to, you got to go to Gold Goats and Guns and join his Patreon page, and you can get that podcast too and be just as in touch on stuff as I do. I'm happy to plug anyone else who's here. That just because I don't always put down the links as I should, because I'm still learning. You guys need to understand when I take this stuff, I'm happy, except for the mainstream media when don't go read them. Yeah, you don't read that garbage. You can but read these guys because they're telling you how the world works. With Vanguard following BlackRock's lead and ditching ESG as a policy driver for investment flows, we've likely reached the limit of the stupidity because despite the protestations of commies the world over, capital flows to where it's treated best. It's going away from Europe. There are many goals of this price cap. Some stated, some implied. His comments are in italics afterwards. First goal, limit Russia's oil revenue enough to bleed out their budget. Not likely, as the discount to Brent will rise and fall with futures. Russia's cost of reduction is the lowest in the world, with the highest spare capacity to bring online or take offline. Almost like they were planning for this. Spur other OPEC members to pump beyond their quotas and break the cartel. Again, not likely, as the only ones who have spare capacity are also under heavy sanctions. Uh, Make the Saudis an offer they can't refuse to lead OPEC without Russia. This has fully failed, as the Saudis just signed a strategic partnership with China during Xi's first visit to a foreign power since COVID. Faster than you say, multipolar world. Yes, Saudi is leaving the orbit of the United States. This is a big effing deal. And I said in a couple places, it sounds like Saudi Arabia could use some more freedom. Bring the price of oil down to allow Biden to refill the SPR at a big discount. And that's a bunch of stuff using manipulated future prices down. Cause further chaos in oil shipping to freeze investment capital in an industry trillions behind the curve in acceleration because of ESG and the EU policy. This is what the real goal is. They had to get rid of UK Prime Minister, and why Germany happily went along with Nord Stream bombing and closing off the Drupes of pilot plan. Yeah, they didn't want Britain to. Liz Truss got taken out because she was going to frack in England. And Rishi Sunak's first thing he did in an energy crisis was to cut energy production. Anyone who freezes to death this winter in England or goes broke because of that, it's his fault. He's a bad person. I don't care. And she defeated a person of color to be leader of England. Disraeli had him beat back in the 19th century. Give me a break. And Disraeli, of course, was a Jew, but he was Jewish, but Jewish by race, not by that. But he's like a foreign national, like as he once said on the floors of Parliament to someone, something along the lines of like, "Hey." When he called him out on his being born Jewish, he's like, though to be in politics, he was an Anglican, but he didn't shy away from his Jewishness. He said something along the effects of like, "Hey, while my people were building the pyramids of Egypt, you guys were still trying to learn how to start fire." The force Putin to sell Europe oil below market prices to fund the upcoming war effort against Russia, now clearly on the table for 2023. I don't know. I'm still not too sure about that. War is a big thing. They want you to believe oil flows to Europe have been cratered while bookings for Sovcom Fallout's tanker fleet are up. The only numbers that matter are Russia's exports, not whether oil flows through Western tracking data. I just don't see, like, Europe can't go to war with Russia because their armies don't exist. And I think I should mention that to Tom. Where are these getting this army? It will take years to build up. It could be very well that we could be seeing this in 2025, 26, but you can't go to war with an army of 66,000 men. These guys don't have the troops to do the things we keep thinking they do. And that's one of their things, is they spent the last 30 years emasculating the most conservative group of people in their countries, the military, and they think financial weapons of war will be better but the fact is they don't have the capability, they don't have the capital to write the checks they're trying to cash. I've maintained for years that Europe feels, and this is Tom, they have some kind of monopoly, single biopower over Russian energy. And all they had to do is hold their nose and refuse to buy Russia's products, and this will force them to sell at whatever price they demand. Yeah, he's talking about the war in Europe. To believe that the EU only pursued its antagonistic relationship with Russia because it's a colony of the U.S. empire is simply delusional at this point. At no point did Europe try to make peace with Russia financially, economically, or diplomatically. Tom's thesis is that Europe is actually a bad actor here, and they used America as their, like, still look America as their military colony, while Europe actually, all these suffering, they don't care about their people. this European elite group. This group, if you read Stephen Harper's book, Right Here, Right Now, he calls them the somewheres versus the anywheres. And the somewheres are people who can go anywhere in the world and basically feel themselves at home, where the rest of us are the anywheres who feel best in their one place in one time. And I've heard these people called, Tom calls them Davos. I've heard transnationalist is another, and you can figure out the slang one on that one. To believe that illusion at no point in Europe, yeah, mission blows. Chancellor Merkel said she intentionally screwed over Russia for the last 8 years of the Minsk Accords. Europe chose this path. They chose freely to freeze Russians' foreign exchange reserves, declined to buy their oil and gas, and sanction Russia to the point of destabilizing not just their own food and energy security, but also everyone else's in the province. Davos, those transnationalists, hate those anywheres the freedom of oil and gas represent. Their strategy is to starve the entire oil complex and has needed capital in the hope it collapses. What it's actually doing is acceleration of creation of favorable markets for shipping, insurance, payment and clearance, and investment banking for basic commodities in markets outside their control. They've interfered in a bunch of elections. Most of these have failed, but have succeeded in making the world less safe, less predictable. They're trying to create chaos and try to come out on top of it. Probably going to fail. All over a few miserable dollars per barrel, as always. So, anyways, that was Tom's piece today. I hope you enjoyed listening to me kind of give you my perspective on the news today. And, I got another person. Welcome, Clearwater Seeker. Hello from Holland. Hey, how's it going over there? That's something I haven't looked into in a while. I heard your government might have caved on the what's happening with the farmers. So maybe we should go see the farmers revolt there. I remember our prime minister tried to do that here, but the way Canada works, it's very much the provinces make all the decisions. So when the prime minister, Trudeau is a lot weaker in certain areas. He has very strong powers in specific places, military, the power of the purse, like he has much of the taxing authority, but that's all tied up in 10-year deal plans with the provinces. He could screw around with the border a lot. That's why after all the lockdowns went away, we still had to wear masks on the planes for a while. And he has a lot of power with the judiciary. He gets to appoint all the Supreme Court justices, though he does have a cap. But it doesn't really matter since almost all the Supreme Court justices are based on provincial locations. So you have to, and they're also kind of ideologically aligned. It's all like the 80s in the United States, where the judges were all kind of like the same thing. There's no like conservative retrograde movement here. But on the other hand, because they're all kind of on the same basic ideological strand, they're not as crazy radical as now the Democrats say justices are in the United States. It's all kind of the same bland liberalism that you used to see in the 70s. So I'll close off that tab. So what I'm saying, so when Trudeau came up and said, he went up to people like Doug Ford and Scott Moe and said, we want you to cut production of your food by 30%. And they're like, we're not doing that. That's stupid. Nitrogen's 92% in the atmosphere, dumbass. I think they're a little more productive than that, but like Trudeau can't do anything. He doesn't control agricultural financing in that kind of way, as seems to Holland. So what was I going to look at here? Just go up here. Holland farmer protest. Go to the news. I remember seeing one video. This is all from. So I guess it looks like it has dropped down in priority here. I'm not seeing anything really going on in recent days, other than like radicalized by conspiracies. Some activists see the farmers and others the biggest victims of assault. Yeah, right. NBC News, you are just doing exactly what your corporate sponsors want. Anyways, I've been talking about for nearly an hour here, and I'm glad to see we had all these people come in and watch. I'm happy to just continue to grow the community. Follow down below and find my locals page. That's where you can interact with me, and if you want for some reason to give me money, that's where you can do it. I'm not looking for any kind. I don't care about PayPal or any of those kind of things. Don't want to give them any more money than I have to. But if you like that, if you like this stuff and want to hear more from me and hear from my perspective on things and learn a little history and learn a little about what I think, what really seems to be going on today, be sure to follow, like, share, and subscribe, and let your friends know that I'm out here trying to help people out. Okay, I've been. I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.